Western Teacher Live, cutting through noise on public education and union issues.
Welcome to Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. My name is Bob Figg, and joining me today will be Matt Jarman, the President of the SSTUWA. And we're going to be discussing a broad-ranging position paper that the union has sent to each of the major political parties in Western Australia ahead of the state election, currently scheduled for March the 8th, 2025. And as you might expect, coming from the SSTUWA, the areas that we're covering are related to how those parties will treat public education should they secure a term of government. There are two versions, one for schools and one for TAFE, and you'll be able to find them on our website at sstuwa.org.au, member or not. So we'd love you to take a look. The school submission is closely aligned with the priorities and solutions identified in the Face in the Facts report, which has changed the public education debate in Western Australia completely and has put education as a top priority for the state's politicians and voters. So with me, as I mentioned, to discuss what the SSTUWA is citing as the key issues for the future of public education in WA is Matt Jarman. Matt, welcome, and let's get underway with the first issue to discuss, Section 1 of this election document, more funding and better expenditure.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, well, obviously we have a new national and state funding agreement which will kick in from 2025, and whilst it's a little bit lower than the 100% minimum funding standard that we were aspiring to, it's a lot better than the 91% that we had at the commence of 2024. So we recognise that there is certainly a good bump. One of the concerns that our members ought to continue to have is that WA in the original and the subsequent Gonski models were always supposed to be funded at 105% of the standard resourcing system, and of course this only brings us still to 96. So we continue to work hard on convincing government that they need to be contributing 100% for Western Australia, which, as I've mentioned in past podcasts, has the demographic and geographic challenge of a very, very big area with small populations, which adds to the costs of running public education across the state. And with the diminishing number of regional areas serviced, that adds to further cost. So there is a significant amount of more work to do. We'll focus upon that, but we'll also use the $1.6 billion as much as we possibly can with state government leaders to make sure that that funding is delivered to the areas that is in need of it. But unfortunately for the state government, as it heads into the new election period, there is still a significant amount that's required for our schools and for our teachers and for our students, and that our parents would like to see allocated. And they're all covered, of course, in this election document.
And I know we've mentioned it time and time again, of course, at different times, but that 4%, is the reason we talk about 96 is that while the federal and state components add up to 100, the state government is still allowed to count what used to be an extra 4%, and that's where the gap comes when we discuss it and say 96, and the government says, oh, it is full funding, it's 100, but it's not because they haven't given that extra 4% back.
That's correct, and that 4% in 2024 was worth, we estimate, at $225 million, and the reason why we find that particularly galling is that the private school system does not have to contribute that 4%, but actually benefit from that 4%. So there are services and other developments that come from that 4% that they enjoy and they can participate in, but they don't have to contribute to it. So it is true to say that the private school student in Western Australia receives a minimum of 100%. Some private schools are bound by agreements which take them up to 102, 105%. But our public school student only receives 96%. And of course, we service and support 2/3, depending on whether you're talking about primary or secondary, of students in Western Australia. So we still feel as if there is a significant amount to fight for. And that $225 million grows by $10 million a year. So by the end of this funding agreement, it is highly likely if Jason Clare, the Federal Minister, gets away with a 10-year period for the agreement, as he has suggested halfway through 2024, that the funding gap between private and public school West Australian students will in fact be in excess of $300 million, which we find absolutely unacceptable. And
of course, if you're a parent of one of the 66% or so of high school students who attend state schools, not private schools, or the 72% from memory who attend primary schools in the state system, and you're voting, it's well worth letting your local MP know how strongly you feel about these issues, because that, at the end of the day, is what makes politicians listen. It's you, the voters, so let them know. Now, Section 2 of this election document, Matt, is class sizes. Now, we've talked about class sizes extensively before. This reinforces some of the messaging that has gone through in our Target 27 campaign. So this is about reinforcing that message, yes?
It certainly is, and of course we won't stop campaigning on class sizes. And what's very, very close to the class size issue, which is also documented quite in significant detail and explanation for members in the Facing the Facts reports, is the teacher-to-student ratios. The teacher-to-student ratio for Western Australia is the worst in the country. So that's the proportion, obviously, of students to teachers servicing the needs of our kids in our schools. So we not only have class sizes as a maximum class size in Western Australia equal to or the worst in the country, but we also have the worst teacher-to-student ratios. So this part of the election package deals with both, in effect, and we need to see wins in both areas, because we have far too many students needing support in our schools, no matter who and where you may be, and that's being caused by the fact that the ratio is too high and we have maximum class sizes bigger than any other state.
And members, thank you for your support of the Target 27 campaign, and indeed non-members. We've had some amazing figures come through on that on our Facebook page. Well over 6,000 interactions and nearly 1,000 engagements, which for those who know how social media works is very big figures, and over 7,000 visits to the Target 27 pages on our website. There's 10,000 in total, and they're from over 7,000 individuals. So there really is big support out there for this.
There really is, and I really also want to echo your sentiment there, Bob, because it's not only I want to say thank you to all of the members and their supporters who came out, but all of those parents who have contacted the SSTU, came out to the mobile billboard and thanked the SSTU, in effect, for running the campaign, because this is about the kids that they've got in their families and in their classrooms, and they recognise that. I think that's a really important pickup that the state government should take notice of, that this is something that is intuitively the right thing to do, and that is exactly what we would hope that any political party entering the state election would consider. And also the fact that Western Australia is in a black position as far as the economy goes. We are having quarterly surpluses being produced all the time. This is one of those social dividends that the state government can rectify, whether it be teacher-to-student ratios or maximum class sizes. And for a wealthy state, I've said it time and time again, like WA, no time like the present to fix this. And I hope that is exactly the kind of message that the decision makers within the political parties take on board.
Well, we hope they do too. And again, that's public pressure and member pressure, so keep up the good work. Now, very much related to class sizes, and many of our members have told us this is school infrastructure, because it's fine. Some of the things are about how many kids are in the classroom and the proportion to teachers, but some of it is also about old buildings, classrooms that are in no way designed to accommodate 27 students, 30 students, 32 students, and that general situation with capital works in areas like air conditioning. So Section 3 is about school infrastructure.
And we have to recognise that in recent times there has been more of an effort made for new builds and refurbed builds, but the legacy issue that government has inherited here is that capital infrastructure across our public schools has been deplorably let go for a considerable amount of time. So So what we now need to see is a new plan as to how we're going to bring all and every classroom and school back up to a standard that is 2025. You raised the issue of evaporative air conditioning. So I was in a school in the North Metropolitan area on Monday of this week, and it had refrigerated air conditioning in every classroom, reasonably new school. It was quiet, it was cool, kids were having a fantastic time at the end of the year events. Walked into another school on the same day, 38 degrees, evaporative air conditioning, you couldn't hear yourself talking to one another. So it is actually much more of an impactful issue than people outside of school land give it credit for. What it means to learning and what it means for outcomes for students, and also just workplace health and safety is quite significant on these really dry and hot spells that we can have in WA.
And of course that's in the metro area, and our country members will be very keen to remind us that some of the conditions they are working in, not just in the obvious areas like the Kimberley and the Pilbara, but down in the south, as the climate changes, this is becoming more and more of a key issue right across the state. So number 4, Matt, and this is probably where we get some of the issues that have been addressed in the general agreement to some extent, but also this issue of teacher shortages as well, and that is staffing schools.
We certainly did have some significant wins which we'll see the benefit from over the next couple of years in the EBA. I urge all members to look at all of those attraction and retention opportunities. It is absolutely imperative to keep in mind that if you're a permanent person in particular locations, you can now go out to these regional schools with the district allowance that comes with some of these regional or many of these regional locations. Now, financially, there's a reward, but similarly, you get to retain the right of entry and your permanent position back to your substantive position if you're in one of those areas. So that is a significant shift. It is all about making sure that both the metropolitan and country schools are well staffed and well supported, but there's a lot that can be done at small cost, in effect, to any political party who wants to take them on board, and that is cost being borne by the teachers. So, for example, laptops and devices that teachers absolutely need as a tool of the trade. It's a well-recognised tool of the trade, but they still have to purchase it, lease it, and then they hand it over to their employer, and then they get it back in some refurbed format. It really ought to be supplied. So there's quite a significant number of drop points in this area, Bob, and I hope that members read through them because they are all about making sure that people want to stay in the profession.
And again, another key thing, especially in the regions, is the Government Regional Officer Housing, known colloquially as GROW, a provision of housing for public servants, not just for teachers, but people like police, etc. as well. But it has never recovered from some decisions made in 2006. It's seen the stock diminish in both terms of quality and indeed quantity. So Section 5 is asking for the government for action on GROW.
I've never seen GROW in such a poor state. That's the bottom line. So we need a new plan. We can't continue to just look at the model that has been allowed to sort of run out of steam as population growth in WA has exploded. We simply don't have the stock. We don't have the systems in place anymore. We need a new plan, and we need government to turn its attention to that. So whilst I totally recognise and applaud the contribution that's been made towards social housing and homelessness, they are absolutely important issues for any government to consider. So is the safety and housing of public sector workers in the bush. If we don't look after them, then we simply won't have the right people in the bush to look after the students and communities' needs. So it is time now for government to turn its attention to GROW. It is a large problem, but I think all stakeholders from public sector unions want to be involved in the conversation and are happy to be involved working with government on it.
And some of those direct effects for people to ponder. We've had teachers who've had to literally sleep in school gyms for a period until they could get some sort of housing. They've had to stay in caravan parks, and some have been subjected to harassment in the local community because they have no security whatsoever for their housing. So it's a real issue. It's not a theoretical issue. It's one that impacts on people every day. Now, within Section 6, we are looking at supports and services for students, teachers and school leaders. And there are about 30 different dot points in this section alone because of the broad nature where teachers need more help, whether they are teachers who lead or just, our school leaders now or are teaching every day and the students they are servicing. There is such a demand now for more support.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. No, this section actually runs over a couple of pages in the election package, so I urge members to have a look at it. And effectively, it's an array of suggestions for political parties to consider, but every one of them is critical. I can't single one out. We are talking about bringing resources back into schools and regional areas where they are most needed for students and staff. You would think that that is a fundamental goal of any Department of Education. We are urging both the government to realign the services that it has for schools in an appropriate fashion that meets the needs of those schools, but also central services to make sure they recognise the important needs of what those schools are as well. So this section deals with a vast array. I think it's fair to say that the centralisation of services and digital recalls and things like that for trying to access individuals hasn't worked, particularly as the complexity of student needs has continued to absolutely spiral and get out of control from the system. So we certainly need it to be properly addressed, and this couple of pages in this election package tries to deal with that.
And they are very broad, as Matt says, couldn't possibly go through them all, ranging from IT to the appointment of technician support for arts, design and technology, and even in PE. We have to get classrooms ready. You're not just going in there to teach. Moving on to Section 7, and this was an area that was very, very closely and studied by the Facing the Facts committee who developed the report, and of course is well known on a national level as well, and that is Aboriginal education. And when you referred at the start of this podcast to the need for the original Gonski report, which said WA needs extra funding over the 100%. This was very much a focus, wasn't it, because of the broad range, not only geographically, but in terms of demographics that WA covers, particularly with respect to Aboriginal education.
That's correct, Bob. I'm glad you mentioned Facing the Facts, because it's a reminder to members to go back to this section of that report and have a look at what the analysis says. It's very detailed and clear about the gap and the widening gap in terms of Aboriginal student outcomes. Many of the dot points in this section actually are no cost. These are about transparency so that we've got a clear idea as to exactly what's happening. And these are also about how we are identifying the needs of Aboriginal students in our public schools. And once we have all of that information, then we can develop a strategy that we can try to reduce the gap with regards to. But at the moment, we need greater transparency and understanding as to what's going. We have packages and we have programs that are all operating in isolation and not in concert with a coordinated system approach. And all of that needs to be reviewed and put back into a proper plan, because at the end of the day, as the title of this section suggests and as it states in Facing the Facts, the gap is widening. It is not closing. So we need to be honest about that, and we need to put resources and the right people in place. We really would like to see a more coordinated support service focused purely on Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal student needs coming from the centre than what we currently have. Having the Aboriginal Cultural Standards Framework is simply not a solution. It is an outstanding document and framework, but it is not a solution that's ever going to close the gap. It's not about doing that in the first instance. So we need to see much greater effort being made, a more coordinated effort. We need resource allocation, but also we can turn our attention immediately to some of those no-cost items, which are about transparency and accountability.
And again, one of the key things mentioned is that strong and authentic, genuine community engagement with families and local communities around these issues. Section 8, and this is one we know is very close to the heart of our members. We have seen studies where violence in schools and acts of violence and abuse against teachers, against school leaders, and a rise in gendered violence as well, reflecting what is happening in the community. It's not an issue that just pops up in schools. It comes in from the community outside. So improving behaviour and reducing violence and aggression is very much the keystone of Section 8.
And again, an area that has to have a dedicated space to now because it's been so under-resourced, and that really goes to professional learning and the right people supporting schools. I don't think we need to dwell on exactly what the safety and the violence looks like. I think we need to focus on the fact that we have a minister who's made a very clear and strong statement about violence and safety and no tolerance for either of them. And now we need to build upon that with some additional resources and better coordination. But at the end of the day, this remains one of the top issues as to why members are leaving public education. So until it is properly fixed and resolved and given the due attention through resourcing and the placement of proper people, and dare I say it, Bob, ownership of the issue. When there is a violent issue within a school, rather than try and not deal with it, let's deal with it. Let's be honest about the fact that it happened, and then let's make sure that it is steps are put in place to make sure that it's minimised to be prevented from ever happening again, or it's completely thwarted and we never see such an incident again. But we haven't quite got to that place yet. But I will give full credit to the direction that the Minister has put in place, and also the appointment of the new Director General, who seems to certainly have an appetite to make our schools as safe as possible.
And that's really good news. And of course, it is, as we've said, one shared value is this is a community issue. It needs community solutions. And a school can't on its own solve these problems. It needs the community working together to say this is unacceptable behaviour, stop it.
Yeah, and our teachers and our school leaders need to know that when they take an action, because there's been a violent incident, that they're not going to be hauled over the coals, they're going to be supported. And that's been missing a little bit, and I think that it's a confidence boost as much as anything else, but it goes to trust.
And something we've been seeing a lot of in recent days and weeks, especially at the federal level, this discussion about the early years, the best start possible for every child. And that coincides almost exactly with Section 9, which is talking about how we can improve early childhood education.
Yeah, well, for me, there are again a number of dot points here that we're recommending political parties to consider, but I can't go past the fact that pre-primary classrooms in Western Australia are at 27. We have, as reported in Hansard in the last quarter of 2024, a 22-month waiting list for parents to be able to access paediatricians and other similar specialists. So what we in effect have is students with high needs in our public classrooms, large class sizes. It really needs to be dealt with through multiple levers, and one of them is most certainly reducing pre-primary class sizes down to 24, which would still not make it, interestingly, Bob, the lowest of pre-primary classes in the country. Many of them, though, are at 24, but there are states where pre-primary classes is actually 20. So here in WA, we expect our 4 and 5 year olds to go from a class size of 20 in kindergarten, then to 27, and then back down to 24 in year one. It's not logical. So we need to be dealing with the class sizes in pre-primary, and again, I don't think that there is a great cost here when 80% of pre-primary classrooms in WA are actually at 25. So we're not looking for a significant resource allocation to achieve the goal of getting it down to 24. We need to fund the 20% that are at 27, and then we need to a small bundle of funding to bring the class sizes down to 24.
And it's interesting with this, the submission of the politicians, the public's pretty much made up its mind. They agree in huge numbers that everybody deserves a quality education. And they very strongly agree, again with big numbers, that teachers have to deal with too much red tape, and most significantly of all, massive support for a change in class sizes. So the layperson recognises these issues.
They certainly do, but what's very important, and I'm sure our members will appreciate it, at the very rear of this document is the reference points. So this is not just a group of SSTUWA senior officers pulling out a bunch of dot points that they think is a good idea. Our election package is born and comes from evidence and research. And this is all not only facing the facts, but many, many other research, and to the point that we've got an entire page there that's listing where these election asks have come from. So political parties ought to feel comfort in the fact that all of these requests and suggestions have come from a place that is sourced and also comes from a place of great need.
And it's not just identifying problems, it's proposing solutions. So to conclude our podcast on these documents, we should also mention there is one specifically for TAFE. I think we should be fair, and the Labor government reacted very strongly to an excellent SSTUWA campaign, what was it now, 2 campaigns ago, to protect TAFE and that TAFE was working, so don't break it. And Labor has done that well, but there are issues, and a lot of them are similar to those in schools that TAFE lecturers are finding, and they need help in addressing them.
That's certainly the case. TAFE system operates differently entirely to the school system, but member issues such as GROW, regional attraction and retention, lecturer to student ratios, unlike the school system, there is not a cap, and that places enormous pressure on our lecturers. And our lecturers also need greater guidance, support and professional learning in looking after the mental health needs of who are effectively young adults. These are people who are trying to get somewhere in life, and they come to their TAFE lecturer for all sorts of support outside of just the course that they're enrolled in. And of course that then means there needs to be a plan and a mechanism and the right kind of training that's required. So whilst the federal government has invested quite significantly in TAFE, and we do recognise that, federal Labor, what we still need to see done is a lot of state-based work. The provision of support for students in our TAFE colleges is indifferent at best. But again, like schools, the state government has invested in capital infrastructure around TAFE colleges. There are some absolutely magnificent TAFE colleges, and then there are others that are in effect in need of a rebuild. So capital infrastructure, GROW for our members, as well as support for the needs of students in our classes. TAFE is a critically, and I've lived through the experience now as a dad with two boys in TAFE, or coming to the end of their time in TAFE, is a critically important function of education. It doesn't just stop when they leave Year 12. TAFE is part of their education journey. So it's critically important that we have the right people and that those right people are well resourced, and then we have the right kind of capital infrastructure for them to learn in.
One thing that's probably more noticeable immediately for people about TAFE is it directly contributes to the economy. Everything is about the cost of living these days in the economy. And I think one of the things the union has focused on is actually portraying not just TAFE, where it might be a little bit more obvious that you developing more brickies, you're developing more people who can work on mine sites, you're developing more nurses, etc. But you are also within schools, these investments deliver economic benefits and cost of living benefits to parents.
Absolutely, and that's why we have to continue to fight for TAFE, because it is not only a lifeline for the individual students who are entering into it and developing and launching their careers, because not everybody wants to go to university, and certainly with the accumulated HECS debt, despite recent announcements, people are still very much questioning that as a life choice, but also because of the economic outcome that comes from it. And I know firsthand that we have first-class TAFE facilities and first-class lecturers who are delivering the very best they can, but because of the demand on TAFE and because of the demand on the economy and the workforce, we still need to absolutely fight for TAFE to make sure that it's properly funded and well-resourced.
And within schools, of course, for parents, some are facing a choice going, I've got to send my son or son or daughter to a private school. With the raising of levels in state schools above what they already are, and many of them are more than competitive when it comes to delivering results. Many league tables show that state schools can do just as well if they're well-resourced. You know, we talk about little savings for parents, but if they could save $10,000 or $15,000 a term by having more confidence in their state school, that's a pretty big cost of living bonus.
Well, I think the private school stuff is very much just a marketing thing, because my lived experience is that there are lots of private school students enrolled in TAFE and they chose to be there. They're not there because of any other reason. They said, this is what I want to do with my life and who I want to be. So there they are in TAFE, and you have to go back to the point that you're making about, well, what did the other cost actually deliver? State schools outperform private schools in many areas, and that is complete kudos to our members, whether they be teachers, school leaders or school psychs who are in our state schools, because at the end of the day they are doing a remarkable job with lower resourcing quite considerably. So they are superhuman people, Bob.
They are indeed. And of course we are in that time of year. There's an election scheduled for March the 8th. There's possibly a federal election around a similar date. You may well get a knock on your door at some point, no matter where you live, especially though if you're in a marginal seat, and it'll be a local local candidate who is looking for your vote, and where you can help directly with that is to make sure the conversation is politely held about the importance of public education. That's where you can make a direct difference. Now, member or not, you can access both documents in full at www.stuwa.org.au, and they'll be pretty prominently up near the top of the opening page of the website. So please do go take a look. Matt, thank you very much indeed. It's our final podcast of the year. We hope you've enjoyed them, and we'll certainly be back with some more in 2025.
Thanks, Bob. And I just want to say a quick thank you to all of the listeners. When I entered the podcast space, I had no idea too much about podcasts, but they clearly have strong currency with our members. They've been referred to me quite a number of times, particularly during the industrial action earlier on in the year. So to everyone who has spent a few minutes listening to and getting some information from them, they will be back, and we look forward to finding other effective means to communicate to our members. The final e-news, or today's e-news, will certainly include an update on EBA matters prior to going into the Christmas break. So we'll always try to explore new communication and another means of reaching out to our members, but certainly I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's tuned into a podcast. Not being a podcaster at all before 2024, it certainly is a very effective medium, and I'm glad it's been able to service many of our members.
Yes, thank you for listening to A Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the SSTUWA.
Are you aware of your SSTUWA member benefits? We've got you covered on a range of member benefits from entertainment to insurance and legal. Check out our benefits hub via sstuwa.org.au/benefits.